Welcome to the webinar, Greening Your Finances. I'm Lisa Ashford and I'm CEO of two positive investing platforms, Ethex and Energize Africa. I'm joined today by Becky O'Connor from Good With Money, Barbara Hammond and Saskia Huggins from Low Carbon Hub, and Mark Hodgson from CoCars. And we're going to hear from everybody a little bit more later. The format of the session is that we will have a discussion today and then we will open up for Q&A. We have about 45 minutes scheduled for the session, but we can run to an hour if we've got lots of questions. And you can submit the questions via the chat function all the way through, and I will keep a watching eye on those and try and pull them into the conversation, or we'll address them all at the end. And obviously I need to say that this shouldn't be treated as financial advice in any way. We can't answer any specific questions regarding your own personal financial circumstances. And we will be sending some more information as follow-up after the webinar. So if we don't get to all of your questions, hopefully the additional resources will help to answer any outstanding queries. So as I'm sure you've all read and heard about, whilst carbon emissions have been reduced during this great pause, in the longer term, COVID certainly is not going to be significant enough to curb our global warming challenges, and we need to use our money to help build the future that we want by investing in things which will create a brighter future and create more resilient communities. And hence the hashtag Build Back Better has been coined. So we're going to be thinking about finances from two perspectives. Firstly, from the investor perspective, in terms of the wider ethical investing, or as we like to call it, positive investing marketplace. And then the other perspective of why we need organisations like the Low Carbon Hub and CoCars to help create a greener, more sustainable economy. So in this part one, we will kick off and start to look at the ethical finance and positive investment marketplace in a broader context. So there was an article today in the FT around how ESG investing has performed in the context of COVID and the challenges that that brings. And actually, there is some research from Charles Stanley that suggests that sustainable funds are far more likely to outperform more standard firms in this period. And actually, whilst a number of traditional funds have seen large sell-offs and outflows of capital, ESG funds have seen large inflows of capital. And actually, the crisis has, shone a spotlight on the role of businesses, that good businesses can play in society. And that's sort of quoted within the Financial Times, which for me is a really positive thing to see, and it gives me great hope. But there is potentially some greenwash that might come with this, that investments or organisations that propose to do sustainable things are actually not quite what we would perceive as being ethical or up to scratch. So how do we, and certainly in this Build Back Better context, it's being used repeatedly at the moment, and for a skeptic like me, that does slightly worry me. So Rebecca, if you'd like to start, how do you think that greenwash is going to play into this whole concept of Build Back Better, and how do we avoid seeing that kind of effect?
I think what I'd start by saying is I think there's a genuine desire to build back better among everybody, because of the coronavirus crisis and the way it's affected everybody one way or another. So there is a moment of opportunity to build back better, but even as I'm saying it myself, it already feels like a sort of cliche and a sort of political phrase that's going to be increasingly misused, as they often are. So I think what we need to do is just make sure we don't lose that genuine feeling as we come out of the crisis, as we seem to be doing, thankfully, and as we come out of it, we still feel that sense of wanting to build a more resilient economy that works for everybody. So ESG, environmental, social, and governance funds, are kind of that's the phrase you will see most often in the context of investments in things that do better. There are other things, other phrases: positive impact, responsible investment, and they are gaining more and more cachet and importance among an industry that has, pretty much not ignored it, but has tried to maybe not give it too much attention over the years. And now suddenly we can see the benefit from a financial point of view, as well as from a social and environmental point of view. And as a result of that, there's a huge amount of interest in this area. So there is greenwash. There are, funds and companies that maybe overstate what they do in their marketing without backing it up with their investments. But I would say the general direction is really, really positive among the investment industry in general. But I think, it's sort of, what do we mean by sustainable? What do we mean by resilient? And just continuing to challenge those who use these terms on what that actually means, so that we can feel satisfied with what we get back in response.
Okay. And in terms of individuals who are looking to green their finances, where do they start? I mean, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different terminology. There are lots of different products in the marketplace. So what do they do, and where should they start? What are they looking for?
There are some really big things that you can do with your money, and in that I would probably include your pension. And there's quite a lot of attention at the moment on moving your pension to a more sustainable fund, and I think that will increasingly be something that people try and do. The average value of a pension pot is about £60,000 in the UK, so it's a lot of money, and it's actually maybe the most amount of money any of us will ever have, besides property if we own a home, that we can do something positive with. So you can look at your workplace pension if you have one, and ask your provider if there's an option to move it to a sustainable fund instead of the default fund, because as yet default funds are not usually sustainable or given that label. So pension is probably the big thing. ISA investments, so there's stocks and shares ISAs, there's cash ISAs, lifetime ISAs, innovative finance ISAs. The average value there in the UK is about £21,000. So again, that's quite a big pot of money that some people have, that they can move to a sustainable ISA. And there are lots of different options within those ISAs, as you know, that you can choose to make a positive impact. So the investments, your pension, your ISA, if you have an ISA, then there's things like your current account. Your bank does things with your money every day, and there are banks that have ethics and positive impact baked into their core business. So that would be another thing to look at, and it's actually relatively easy to switch your current account now. It's all done for you, basically. So if you're worried about hassle, don't be. And then there are other options with your money. So there's basic savings accounts. I would say building societies and credit unions, mutual organisations that are owned by their customers and their members, as opposed to shareholders. generally speaking, will have more of a community focus and be more motivated to put your money to work in ways that are socially beneficial. And then when it comes to things like insurance and borrowing, it gets a bit more complicated to do ethical things with your money, because there are fewer providers that are kind of committed in those spaces, but it's not impossible. And I would point you to the good lists on the Good With Money website to have a look at some of the options available.
Yeah, and I get a sense that people really want to do the right thing and make positive choices with their money. But what they find is that actually some of the products that are available on the market, when they look under the hood, they just don't go far enough. And, you know, there are organizations in there that actually they might be completely opposed to, or just don't feel as if they're doing enough in terms of making a positive contribution, you know, to people and planet. How do they overcome that challenge?
So there is an issue at the moment around transparency. So first off, it's actually often very difficult to find out what your money is invested in. And if you can find out, very often we don't actually know what those companies do. So you might recognize a few big names within the top holdings in a pension fund or an investment fund, but pretty soon you get to a level where you just don't have a clue what these companies do and who they are, or why your money is being invested in them. There are ways you can take more control. Unfortunately, there aren't many ways you can do so without doing a bit of your own research. So you have to do some research to find out what the companies do that your money is being invested in. If you wanted to take better control of your pension, there are self-invested personal pensions. Often when you take an option like that and something is not being managed for you, there is more risk involved. So you need to weigh up the level of control that you're comfortable with from a financial point of view, with your desire to match your money to your values. And that is quite important as people self-direct their investments increasingly. To just be mindful that that they do have the risk is spread, and they don't have all their eggs in one basket, and they're not overexposed to one particular sector. These are all still important things, and you can still take a risk-adjusted approach and not put yourself at financial risk and match your values, but it does take time and care.
Yeah, great. Good tips there. I mean, I think it is quite challenging as well. I was sitting on a round table, and it was with a number of organizations, more traditional finance organizations, and the government's trying to figure out how to mainstream ethical investing and positive investing. And one of the organizations had said that they'd made available a product that was more sustainable, and lots of people had said that they were interested in it, but when it came to it, actually not as many people within their portfolio had actually switched, and they found out that there is so much friction in terms of actually trying to get people to change what they've already got, and that actually it's much easier to influence people at the point of them making either a new pension decision or a new investment decision. Otherwise, it gets filed in that category of too hard, must do that one day, I'm going to work on that next month, and then it never happens. Is that something that you ever get feedback on in terms of, you know, people approaching positive investing for the first time?
I think there are points in everybody's life where they think about money, and you know, that may be 5 or 6 times in a lifetime that somebody actually thinks actively about their pension. It's usually when you join a new workplace or you leave a workplace, and that prompts you to think about it. These are moments of opportunity for the industry to engage people more, I think, in where their money is going. At the moment, those are probably being missed. I think there are ways that we can encourage people to think more often about their pension, and actually ethical and positive impact is a way in to money that hasn't really been tested by the mainstream financial services industry. But what's going to keep me coming back and thinking about my pension, unless I'm moving from workplace to workplace, or unless I'm about to retire, it will be I want to check in because I've heard this company is doing this amazing thing, and I want to see if it's in my pension fund. It's a whole new narrative around investments and pensions that will encourage people to tap into their money and their long-term investments in a way that we possibly haven't seen before.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that gives us a really good point to pick up on later when we're talking to Barbara and Mark about, their investors and what they look like and what kind of feedback they get actually. So opening it up and moving to Barbara first of all. So how or Saskia, sorry, I can't remember who's going to lead, but
ask the question and one of us will speak.
Exactly. In the context of the climate emergency that we find ourselves in, how do you see the low carbon hub? What is their position in terms of, local action versus global changes that are needed? Could one of you talk to that for me?
Yeah, I think I'll take that one. We decided beforehand I would do. So the climate emergency for us is all about how we work with the local institutions in Oxfordshire to tackle it in Oxfordshire. And in doing that in Oxfordshire, if we learn anything, then sharing it as widely as we possibly can outside, and also hoping to learn from others as they work out what to do. What that means for us is that we've just gone into a new business plan period, and we're now explicitly working to a 10-year strategy, which is aligned with the Oxfordshire energy strategy that we were instrumental in getting done. We sit on the Clean Growth Board that is governing that energy strategy, and so explicitly we're saying by 2030 we will have played a significant part in implementing or reaching the goals of that energy strategy. So we're sort of necessary to that is the position we're taking, but not sufficient to that. And so that means that in 10 years' time, we expect the whole of Didcot Power Station to have closed down. And for those who don't know Oxfordshire very well, it's the cooling towers that you used to see when you were on the train from London to Birmingham or London to the West Country that are now no longer there. So the whole coal-fired bit has shut down. So that will be replaced by 2030. We will be well on the way to achieving net zero in Oxfordshire, but the thing that the Low Carbon Hub is going to be really focused on is making sure that none of our citizens are left behind in making that change. And in doing that, it means that we have to transform the energy system in Oxfordshire. It means that we're going to be running the energy system from the grid edge, the low voltage network. It's going to be mainly electric by then, heat and transport as well as power. And we will have worked out how to get new development implemented in a way which is as close to zero carbon as possible. And that's quite a big ask given the huge oil tanker, literally oil tanker that is the planning system. So our model is that we will be developing more renewable energy projects. In Oxfordshire, it's going to be mainly solar because that's the technology that we've got left to do. We need to increase that by at least 6 times by 2030 to hit the targets. And we need that to be working in conjunction with serious energy demand in households and businesses alongside. So we'll be applying the surpluses that we make from our community energy projects after we've paid our shareholders back to helping communities right across Oxfordshire to develop models. We'll be incubating new businesses as we are at the moment, Cozy Homes Oxfordshire for households and ESOX, Energy Solutions Oxfordshire for SMEs, to do that. And we'll be generating really a sort of fractal growth of community benefit outcomes in doing all of that.
And I was going to say, but where it starts from is from that investment. So bringing it back to what people are triggering when they're making decisions about how they're using their money, when they're making an ethical choice in how they're putting their savings to work. All that change that's being triggered, it starts with the capital coming from those investors that unlocks all of that.
And we've had a question from Simon Montgomery about hydrogen. And the view on hydrogen in Oxfordshire, anyway, is that it's going to be a key part of an overall new energy system. Mainly, we think, applied to really heavy transport. So freight transport, last mile, up to last mile, and then electric vehicles for the last mile delivery, buses, public transport, potentially heat also, a little bit of a question mark about that, but also potentially as storage technology. So 3 ways that we think hydrogen is going to be key for that transition.
Thank you, Barbara. And just to address Timothy's quick question, he's after tips, and we are going to come on to that. So we're just setting the context in terms of some examples of some great businesses that are essentially raising finance from individuals to do great things. But we will open up shortly as well to just talk about, you know, what are the trends in terms of direct investing and also, you know, the types of investors that are attracted to these types of organizations and what, you know, people should do if they're starting from a blank sheet of paper. So do bear with us. And coming over to Mark, in terms of the business model that you have, if you could maybe just outline that for us and think about, you know, how does the current economic climate sort of affect your business, and where do you see the key areas of growth for your business?
Yeah, so we're on-demand shared mobility for all. So that means that we provide electric cars, electric vans, electric bikes, electric cargo bikes that can be shared across a city or a town. So people don't have to own their own asset, they can share it. Obviously that's from an economic perspective, that's really good for people, given that your average car is only used 3 to 4% of your time. So that's a real problem. And obviously electric cars are quite expensive. So we give you access to an electric car for £5 an hour, or an electric bike for £1 every 20 minutes. And we were the first in the country to put electric bikes on the street, and we're just rolling out 100 into extra and want to roll out more. So actually from a consumer perspective, it's very easy because everything's done through the app and you can just book it, you go and pick up the car or the bike and you move around and then you pay at the end. So it's very, very simple approach, if you like. Obviously that's quite a behaviour change, but just bring it straight down to the context of COVID, we've just seen a huge behaviour change go on where people are now changing the way they travel. Some of that's through forced, obviously, but we've seen like the boom in cycling that's been huge. You know, people are just selling out. What was it? I heard a quote from Raleigh saying that they haven't sold as many bikes since 1958. You know, they've never been so busy. And our electric bikes are very, very busy. And I guess what a lot of people think about where we are now is actually this is what people want to see. And our feedback has been, this is what we want to see. And I guess this has really created an opportunity for us to say, look, if you want to see cities and towns where it's not full of cars, it's not full of air pollution, you know, you walk out and actually you feel it's pleasant to be in the street and your kids can play there, this is what it is. And if you want to have that, then you've got to have shared mobility. You can't just convert everybody from ICE cars or petrol cars to EV cars, because you're still going to have the congestion, and you're still going to have some elements of air pollution from the tyres and various other things moving around. So shared mobility, and even the head of highways for the UK has said, you know, this is what we've got to do. We're not going to be building huge amounts of roads. And even the head of the AA said, we should be spending that 27 billion, not on roads, but on broadband. And he also, so they did a great research last week that came out and said that 40% of car drivers actually want to drive less. And they're going to drive, they want to drive EVs. So there's a lot of change going on here. And I think this is a real moment in time. I know we're talking about moments in time, a real moment in time where people can say, maybe this could be the future. You know, if one shared car takes 7 cars off the road, you know, there's lots of change where we are at the moment. And from a climate change perspective, you know, transport is 27% of our carbon emissions and the fastest rising. And that's including airports, which obviously are quite low at the moment. So there's a real change, and I think there's a real opportunity now. And I think if people want to see this as their future, imagine if you walked out your door and you had 7 less cars on your road. You know, if you want to imagine, it was really easy for you to cycle, because that's why loads of people have been cycling, because there's more space. Then you invest in companies like ourselves, because you own that. It's not some private company. It's not some Uber, some venture capitalists who have been just sacking people. Lots of different types of companies have done that sort of level. We're trying very grounded and rooted. And we're ultimately trying to create great climate change, absolutely, saving people money, but actually we're just trying to create great spaces for people to live. And if we also think about how our cities are going to be in the future, we're not going to be full of retail. We want to create spaces where people enjoy. And that's one of the troubles, is that our cities are dominated, 40-50% of our land in cities is dominated by roads and car parks. Yeah. And surely that isn't an efficient way.
So picking up on your points there, you talked about some real tangible benefits basically to what you're doing, and Barbara and Saskia brought that across as well. And I think, you know, that is definitely feedback that we get at Ethex, that, you know, people want to often invest in projects or organizations where they can see what the benefit is, and it's very tangible. And Rebecca, do you feel as if there has been an increase in people getting involved in more direct investments? What trends do you see?
Yeah, I think there has, and I think that comes from people demanding more of their money. It's coming from this awareness. So, you know, we've seen in the last few years the kind of rise of crowdfunding in general, and that ability to invest small amounts, if you're not particularly used to investing, you know, to just test the water with companies that you like the sound of and that match your values. So, you know, crowdfunding in general has driven this trend, and it's been backed by regulatory support from the government, the creation of the innovative finance side. So all of these things are there to support that. You know, there's still innovative finance sizes and crowdfunding are, you know, they're still not mainstream, in that, you know, not Joe Bloggs down the road has money in a crowdfund or a community share raise, but I think that demand is there and the interest is there. And actually what that's doing is it's raising the game for everyone else. So, you know, through these smaller initiatives and crowdfunds and community raises, it's demonstrating the demand. And so then you see that even the kind of the low bar investment options that are out there, sort of passive index trackers, which merely track the market and don't really allow you any control at all over where your money is going. Even these products are now tilting, so that there is a climate change, they call it tilting, climate change tilt, which means that these factors are taken into account. It's, you know, probably not good enough, but it just shows that you know, you start off small, and then the bandwagon rolls, and then the bigger guys jump on. So all of this is very important. And I would say the other trend is people's interests and what they expect from the investments is changing and becoming more niche. So when this kind of movement towards ethical finance started, it was obviously you exclude tobacco, you exclude arms, and over time it's become more niche. And now we're seeing people wanting vegan investments and vegan pensions, for example, and things that, you know, perfectly match their values. And what I would say on that is it's hard to find these products in enough volume to give you a real choice. Obviously that will only happen if we demand it and we let providers know that we want these things. So, you know, whoever your investments or pensions with now, tell them, because it's only through that demand that we're going to see people launching things like, you know, a vegan ISA. I think there's one in America, there's not one here yet. But it's just an example of how things are becoming more niche and more tailored to the individual. And in terms of sectors, you know, sustainable food, renewable energy, and affordable housing tend to be the three that, you know, that there's the most choice in at the moment. But I think it will grow.
I mean, I certainly see, from our point of view, with Mark being just one of the sort of organisations that we've started working with, that sustainable transport is really on the rise as well, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of shared mobility, you know, all different types of model, electric cargo, which is all really exciting. So we also touched upon, you said that people are demanding more from their money now, which is an incredibly positive trend, and one which I think will continue and grow, particularly with, you know, the transfer of wealth from our generation to, you know, millennials and beyond. Saskia, could you give us a feeling of what the types of investors you see coming forward to invest in the hub, just for those people who are listening, you know? And I think, you know, you've demonstrated now quite a strong track record. So, you know, how do you see people investing again and again over time, or just once? And just talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we now have over 1,000 investor members in the hub, and they are members. We are based on cooperative principles, so when people invest, they become a member. And that is actually one of the things we talked about, this tangibility, I think, in the sort of scale of impact that people are looking to get in terms of their investment. So it's the fact that they feel that they are part of a collection of people who, by putting their money together, can make a much bigger impact than you might be able to do individually. It's that balance of the local action, and you can see the local activity that you're supporting, but you're also part of a global movement of people who are tackling a global issue. So these are very tangible and very, very large scale problems that are being addressed through local action and local coming together of people. In terms of the actual sorts of people. We really do have a range. The minimum age to invest in the hub is 18, but we do have people who have bought shares on behalf of children, particularly grandchildren. We're seeing this as a way that grandparents might want to start to address some of this, what people now perceiving as perhaps an intergenerational injustice that's happening around climate change. And what better way to invest for your grandparents' your grandchildren's future than to actually buy them shares in something which is not only a nest egg for them, but also that is out there doing something positive for the sustainability of that future that they're going to. We have people who might be just earning for the first time, who are going in at the £250 entry level with their very first investment, through to, we do have a few investors up there who have hit their £100,000 maximum investment. And it is something that we see people come back time and time again as we open new share raises. We had, I have to be honest, we thought we would get share raises as we opened up second and third share offers. We thought we'd see people putting small top-ups, and we're not finding that. We're finding that as people come back for the second or third or fifth, sixth investment, they're actually putting in more and more each time as they're developing a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and you know, building that trust which people need to have in the organisation that they're investing in.
And presumably a track record of returns as well.
Yeah, financial returns, but I say more and more people are very, very interested in getting that feedback about those social and environmental returns, which are just as if not more important to our investors. And so we make sure that we're providing feedback not only about the particular projects that they've invested in, but the hub as a whole, and that sort of secondary wave of impact that the community benefit funds are generating too.
Yeah,
we
right.
get hard time from our investors on making sure they really keep us focused on doing the hard stuff as well as the easier stuff. So they're always asking us what we're doing on energy efficiency, particularly on retrofitting homes, on retrofitting businesses. And it's really good that we've finally, after over the last couple of years, after getting on for a decade now of existence, we really are getting programs going that can do some of that, and it's good for us to have those members to be able to discuss these issues with.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and perhaps what your organisations are slightly different to the norm, because, as you said, you do become a member of the organisation, and you get to attend all of the shareholder annual meetings. You become an integral part of the organisation, and we've heard consistently over the last however many years that shareholder engagement of large corporates is so difficult, and actually to change behaviour or strategy is virtually impossible unless you come together as a real collective, whereas actually that is already built in and ingrained into the organizations that you guys run, which is refreshing, obviously. So whenever we do things like this, people really want to know, but tell me the tips, tell me where to go, what do I need to do, how do I get started? So, should I use a financial advisor or not? Obviously quite a big question there. Rebecca, where should people start, and what advice, non-advice, generalist advice would you give to people to think about how to get started?
It does vary dramatically according to your personal circumstances and how much money you have to spare. So if you have a large amount of money, a financial advisor is definitely worth it. And there are financial advisors who specialise in ethical and sustainable investing. Again, there's a list on the Good With Money website, actually. However, if you don't have, I mean, it's usually about £50,000, the cut-off point, at which point a financial advisor is worth paying for, and because you do have to pay for them. Any less than that, and it's harder to get tailored advice, basically. So if you're interested in this area and you have spare money, start small. And you know, most opportunities on websites like Ethex have a minimum investment amount which is quite low. So if you wanted to start small and build up your confidence over time, that's a really good way of getting into investing. But it is about, you know, working out what you have spare, particularly at a time like this, when incomes are constrained, people feel insecure, and we're not sure about our own futures. So you know, you have to work out carefully what you have available. This might be a little bit easier and less daunting than moving your pension. How easy it is for you to move your pension does depend on where your pension currently is. If you want to leave it with the same provider and move funds, or if you want to move it to a different provider. There are reasons that you may not be able to move your pension that are to do with guarantees and benefits that some pensions have, and if that's the case for you, then you will need to speak to an advisor. So that can be complicated. So I think start small. Do say to yourself that you're going to review these things periodically and regularly, so that once you get into it, you know, you've got a diary note that says in 3 months' time I'm gonna log back in, I'm gonna take a look and see what's happened to that, and I'm going to think about putting some more money somewhere else or in the same place. But it's that regularity, of not forgetting. I think one of the comments in the chat was about, you know, admin and forgetting where your money is. That is a risk. So, you know, take your time with it, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, personal experience here, I found that actually transferring my pensions to one pot with someone who provides sort of like an online access point has greatly sort of increased the transparency of what is in my pension, how much I have, what are the fluctuations in that. And although generally you're always thinking about your pension, you know, very much from a long-term point of view, I feel as if, you know, knowledge is power, essentially. I can then take the next step to make sure that it is being worked hard in terms of the sort of green and ethical point of view. And it's not as far as I would like it to go, but just knowing where my money is and how much it is and what it's doing, I feel more confident in my own sort of money situation. And then that gives me the confidence to use smaller amounts of money to invest in more direct investments where I want that real tangible benefit. So people are also asking about sustainable current accounts, and you know, the Ethex website does list a number of either building society accounts. There are a limited number of ethical current accounts, very limited number, but you can find some information there. You know, in terms of the financial advisors, again, I think you said, Rebecca, that you have a list on your website, which we can provide to people after the event as well, because that is also something that we always get asked. So let's have a look at some more of the questions. Oh, that's a good question. It's hard though. When is the government due to seriously reform the pensions market so that they make it akin to an ISA mortgage market where people can move their money around far more freely?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you're right, pensions reform is on the cards, but it's one of these things that keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. And you know, I don't know is the answer, but it's still happening. The pensions dashboard is the big thing behind all of this. And I mean, we were meant to have something by now, so your guess is as good as mine, unfortunately. And I think what's happening now, which is quite satisfying, is many providers are taking it into their own hands, and rather than waiting for the government to formalise this, transparency and things is now happening on a provider by provider basis. But it's not across the board, and that's the problem, and we do need it to be.
Someone has also asked, how can I invest in initiatives and companies like these through a pension, a SIPP, for example? Now, that is another good question, and also not an easy one to answer. Many pension providers or SIPP providers do not accept unlisted investments. So if it's not listed on a stock exchange, they won't accept it into the SIPP because they can't value it properly. And so that is quite a challenge. And although there are some SIPP providers who will work quite on a sort of case-by-case basis on specific investments, if you can persuade them to, I would say there are not many, if any, SIPP providers who openly advertise that as something that they will do. And I think the government probably is making it even more difficult to have that type of product in a SIPP. Having said that, there are other tax benefits that can be achieved through investing in these types of organizations, depending on the actual offer or the organization itself. So I think the Low Carbon Hub in its early days benefited from some tax reliefs. So EIS, I think you qualified for. Some of the other offers that we list have things like social investment tax relief, which is akin to EIS, that gives you 30% of the investment back through tax relief, which also is, you know, buffers the risk of investing in organizations such as these, and is clearly an incentive to encourage people to put their money into more social based organizations. There is also the innovative finance ISA. So for organizations that either issue bonds or there's loan products, those are eligible to fall within an innovative finance ISA, and the interest from those can be tax-free. And it's a good point. We've seen quite a increase in ethical, well, in ISAs in general, but there are a few now options, aren't there, Rebecca, in terms of ethical ISA products. And I think you have some more information again on different options available.
We have an innovative finance ISA guide on the Good With Money website, which is well worth a read because it's not a familiar product to most people and it is quite unique. On the pensions and ISAs dilemma debate in general, I would say there's no reason, if you can't invest in what you want to invest in through a pension or your SIPP, ISAs can be used to supplement your retirement income. The way the tax works on pensions and ISAs is different. So on a pension, you get tax relief on the payments on the way in. With an ISA, it's tax-free on the way out. So actually, when you retire, ideally, you maybe want a mix of pension income and ISA income. So, if something isn't available through a pension product specifically, don't rule it out as a long-term investment that you might draw upon when you're older, because you would normally have a mix.
Yeah, great. And someone has pointed out quite rightly that there's also the Ethical Consumer website and magazine as well, which has really good advice and tools on ethical products, financial products, plus retail products, etc. So that's also a really good resource as well. Interesting. What else do we have here in terms of questions? Someone asked about quite specific, but on onshore wind. Barbara, do you have any wind in your portfolio of renewable assets?
No, we don't. Oxfordshire's not very windy. So, and where it is windy, we tend to have MOD installations or airports, because historically airfields were in windy places because they were on tops of hills. So we only have Westmill Wind Farm, which is happily community owned as well. But I'm just completely with the question that, you know, the government made a statement about sort of bringing onshore wind back into the fold, but they haven't followed on to make the planning situation easier so that the pipeline of projects really comes through. And it feels a little bit mad because onshore wind is the cheapest form of new electricity. And our onshore wind resource is something like second best in Europe. But I would say that offshore wind, there's been a huge cost reduction through the capital grants programs that the government set up, and then the ROCs and FITs programs. And the UK has the best onshore wind resource, certainly in Europe, if not in the world, and we are world leading. So I would just love to get some community investment into offshore wind in the UK, as they've done in Denmark.
And as Barbara says, Oxfordshire, which is where we focus our activity, it wouldn't be the key technology of choice for us. We need to see a balanced renewables portfolio developing, and so we'd be really keen to see more wind out there in the energy mix.
Thank you. So I think we're coming to the end of our questions. I'm just going to give everyone a quick opportunity to do a quick sort of roundup of 2 minutes. Anything else you would like to add? And I'm going to ask Rebecca if you'd like to go first.
Just do one thing this week, and you know, keep it small. It's less daunting. A small amount of money, open a small account, and then, you know, you'll feel better for having taken that first step. That would always be my number one tip. Something is better than nothing.
Great. Saskia?
Oh, you've queued me up nicely, Rebecca. If you're just doing one thing this week, we are in the last week of our current share raise, which is running on the Ethex website. We've got a £1.5 million target for current investment into our community energy fund, offering 4% for the first 4 years, rising to a target interest rate of 5%. So go and read about it, see if it's for you.
That wasn't set up, actually, so you took that opportunity quite clearly. Barbara?
I would say do it for your children and grandchildren. Start small, as Rebecca was saying. And what I do, and it sounds as though what you do as well, Lisa, I have a core pension that I keep a beady eye on, making sure that it's investing in the right things. But then I have my sort of pleasure pot that I then put into things where I have much more of a personal involvement. And that's what I use to then go on ethical holidays.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, yeah, have a look at our investment. You know, we're offering 5%. We're open now for another month and a half until the end of July. The investment gives an opportunity not just to help invest in exit, but to grow our network. And one thing I would say about investors, we've had interest from all over the country. We already support a car club in Scotland. And one thing that I know people have invested in us because they're particularly interested in cars locally to them or electric bike networks near to them, and we are really happy to do that and develop. And so we've had investment from £250 right up to, you know, £50,000 and above. So yeah, have a look, see what you think about it. And I do exactly the same. You know, I have a core pension like that, and then I have some good different funds from wind to renewables to various other ethical investments. And I think it's a really good way of getting a portfolio. But I would say, you know, the future is going to be renewable and electric and low carbon. It's almost a, you know, if you know, we are going to do something about climate change. This is going to have to happen for the future of humanity, whether anybody likes it or not. So, you know, this is a sort of sector you should be really looking at, I thought.
Great, thank you all. Well, hopefully that gives everyone a really nice short taster of a couple of organisations doing really great things, helping to build our sustainable economy that we want to see in now and more so in the future. And thanks to Rebecca for giving her perspective on personal finance as well. It's always great to have you on board and an expert within the room, apart from the others, of course, as well. So lovely. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. And thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye.